I shot upright before my mind could make sense of anything. Colin's iPhone buzzed on the nightstand, each vibration tapping against the wood like someone knocking straight into my bones. The blue light from the screen flicked across the ceiling, slicing a cold line through the dark. The room was so quiet I could hear his uneven breathing, like he was trying to slow it down so I wouldn't notice he was awake. The call stopped, then started again immediately. I glanced at Colin. He was lying on his side, back toward me, his shoulders pulled tight like someone was holding him from behind. I reached for the phone to silence it. I just wanted the quiet back. I just wanted to sleep. But the moment my finger touched the screen, the speaker clicked on. A woman's voice. Clear, steady, not a hint of shaking. "Put my husband on the phone." I froze. That wasn't the voice of someone who dialed the wrong number at 2 a.m, not someone drunk. It was the voice of a person who's seen the truth and wasn't afraid to say it. Colin shot up instantly, too fast. Fast enough that the sheet wrinkled under his hand. His face went pale, and it wasn't the confusion of someone jolted awake. It was the look of a man watching a door he'd locked tight swing open. "Give it to me." He said it low but firm, like an order he wasn't used to giving me. I tightened my grip on the phone. It was only a few seconds, but long enough for something in me to drop. I handed it to him without asking a thing. The woman had gone silent, but her silence weighed more than her first words. Colin got out of bed, walked into the bathroom, and closed the door. He didn't turn on the light. The only glow came from his phone, spilling a faint line across the floor. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough to know his voice had dropped, steady and controlled, trying to calm someone who wasn't me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my feet cold like they touched water. We'd been married 5 years. I'd never heard him speak to anyone like that. When the bathroom door opened, he hid the phone behind his back. That's not something you do by accident. That's something you do when hiding has become a choice. "Go back to sleep," he said. Just a few words, but there was no warmth. Not even a trace of the man he used to be on the days we still believed in each other. "Who was that?" I asked. "Wrong number," he answered, too fast, too clean. Not a single pause for his body to catch up to the lie. And it was that clean, clipped answer that made me colder than anything else. I lay back down, but couldn't close my eyes. In the dark, every small detail from the past few months lit up like points on a map. Colin avoiding my eyes during simple conversations. His phone always on silent, something he'd never cared about before. The nights he said he had a team meeting, though I never once heard the names of anyone on that team. Him coming home late, the wind on his clothes carrying a smell that didn't match his office. There was no proof of betrayal, but there was a feeling sharp and certain that he was living in a world I wasn't allowed to enter. A world he didn't want me to see. A world that maybe included the woman who called at 2 a.m. I'm not the type to snoop through drawers, read messages, or assume the worst without evidence. But I'm also not someone who can close my eyes and pretend things will fix themselves anymore. Colin fell asleep the moment he lay down, or he pretended to. Either way, it made it hard to breathe. I got out of bed and went to the office. I turned on the tablet that still synced with his calendar, not because I wanted to track him. I just needed to know if I'd been imagining things. His calendar opened, neat and spotless, until I scrolled to the recent days. Some events had been renamed into symbols. S9, 45 Mirror, R, Switch, 11. Not project names, not clients, not anything close to the notes he used to keep. The more I looked, the more these symbols showed up, steady and repeating, stretching back for months. A full schedule. A second life running right under my nose. I set the tablet down. My chest felt like something was pressing on it. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was standing outside my husband's life, not because there was someone else, but because there was a part of him he'd never let me touch. And the phone call at 2 a.m. was just the first small tug on a door I wasn't sure I was ready to look through. I left my studio and went back to the bedroom when the sky was already starting to lighten. Colin was still asleep, peaceful as if nothing had happened. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the glow from the tablet he'd left on the desk. Those strange symbols in his calendar stayed clear in my mind, line by line. They meant nothing to me, but they clearly meant a lot to him. The next morning, when Colin left the house earlier than usual, I noticed one thing. He wore a jacket he almost never used, and as he turned away, something small slipped out of the pocket. A key card, black, no logo, not from his company. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand, completely blank except for a magnetic strip on the back. I put it in the drawer so he wouldn't suspect anything, but a sharp feeling hit me. He had a place he could go, one I'd never heard of. A few days later, while Colin was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message lit up. Tonight at 8. Same room. No name. No extra text. The notification disappeared just seconds after I saw it, like the sender set it to auto-erase, or like Colin was used to clearing them the moment he read them. I tried to keep my breathing steady. This wasn't simple jealousy. It felt like standing in front of a locked door, knowing there was a world behind it that my husband stepped into every week, a place important enough for him to hide. The more I paid attention, the clearer the gaps became, things I'd brushed aside before. He changed his phone password without mentioning it the way he used to. He took calls in the garage and hung up the second he walked into the kitchen. He referred to meetings that had nothing to do with the job I knew he had. One afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store and ran into Sam, someone who'd worked on a project with Colin before. We weren't close, but familiar enough to say hi. Colin's been busy lately, Sam said. I see him leaving the office early every week for those, whatever they are, meetings with his private group. Private group? My chest tightened. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What group? I thought he worked full-time at the office. Sam gave a small, almost confused laugh, like he thought I was joking. No, he's part of some kind of community, workshops, coaching, something like that, but looks like he's never brought his wife along. I pressed my lips together. No, he hasn't. I didn't want to hear more, and I didn't need to. The answer was already clear. That night, when Colin walked into the closet, I decided to ask directly. No circling around, no traps. Why did you get a message about tonight? I asked. What room is same room? Colin froze, just for a second, but long enough for me to see him realize I'd figured something out. Then he exhaled, so quietly, too quietly. It's nothing, just random stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. Just a few words, but they dropped into me like a steel curtain. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it, the way he tried to soften everything, like I was someone too naive to understand anything that was happening. He turned away and kept changing his clothes, as if our conversation wasn't even worth pausing for. In that moment, the space between us wasn't a few steps in the bedroom. It was a deep alley with no bottom, a place where he stood on one side and I stood on the other, reaching out but never able to touch him. The next day, I logged into our joint bank account to check some family expenses. I wasn't trying to investigate Colin. I just needed to make sure we weren't going over budget this month. But the moment the transaction list loaded, I froze. There were recurring transfers every week to a place called Studio Lantern. I'd never heard Colin mention it. I'd never seen anything he did that involved a studio. I scrolled down. A large transfer, big enough that he had to know I'd notice, sent to someone named Juliet Hale. I leaned back in the chair, my hands shaking a little, not because I thought Juliet was his lover, but because I didn't know who she was. And in that uncertainty, Every possibility felt frightening. Her name echoed in my head, mixed with the voice from that night. Put my husband on the phone. I didn't want to guess anymore. I needed the truth. I looked up the address for Studio Lantern and drove there at lunch, when Colin thought I was working. The building sat in a quiet area with a frosted glass front. No big sign, just a small plaque with the studio's name. I stepped into the lobby. The space was wide and calm, with warm yellow light and the smell of fresh wood. A young man, probably the manager, looked up when he saw me. He gave a polite smile. Hi there. How can I help you? I wanted to ask about... I stopped, not sure what to say. But before I could think further, his eyes lit up, like he'd just connected something. You're Nora, right? I froze. Colin said you'd never come here. The words cut into me, thin but deep. Not because he knew my name, but because Colin, the man who slept next to me every night, had talked about me in a place I didn't even know existed, and he'd said I'd never come here, as if this was his space, not ours. I held myself together, but it felt like tiny cracks were spreading inside me. I forced a small smile at the manager and said I was just stopping by to check out the studio. But the truth was, I couldn't see anything clearly anymore, except for one thing. Colin had built a part of his life he never intended to let me into, and Juliet Hale, the woman who called at 2 a.m, was part of that life. The manager walked away after saying that, leaving me standing in the lobby with a feeling that was both sharp and cold. I walked slowly farther in, trying to keep my breathing steady. If I wanted to know what Studio Lantern really was, this was the moment. The place didn't look anything like a spot for secret affairs. No hidden corners, no cheap perfume, no traces of anything sneaky. Instead, it was a large room with lighting set in warm pools, broken up by soft shadows that gave it depth. The walls were lined with papers covered in phrases about self-awareness, mental training, personal connection. One corner had a round mat, another had a rack of props, chairs, wooden blocks, a few pieces of fabric, not for theater, more like a space where people practiced expression, emotional openness, or some kind of personal development training. I walked farther in and saw a row of lockers on the left. Each one had a name or symbol written in marker. One of them was labeled CL. My heart jumped. I tried the handle. It opened. Inside were a black t-shirt, a stainless steel water bottle, a small notebook, and a pair of sneakers I'd never seen at home. Everything was clean, organized, the kind of things he used often but kept separate from the life we shared. I touched the shirt, thin, soft, carrying a faint wood scent from the studio. There was nothing of me in it. It belonged to a version of Colin I'd never met. I was closing the locker when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. A woman stood a few steps away, hair tied back, light jacket, eyes steady enough that I couldn't read a single emotion from them. Juliet Hale. She didn't look like anything I'd imagined. No hostility, no defensiveness, no air of someone intruding on another person's marriage, just a calmness of someone who had known something for a long time while I was still stuck on the outside. She looked at me, gentle but direct, not avoiding me, not trying to overpower me. You're Nora, she said. Her voice didn't carry surprise, only acceptance, like my being here wasn't something she expected, but also not something that shocked her. I nodded, my throat tight and dry. Juliet glanced at the locker, then back at me. No judgment, no awkwardness, but something that looked almost like sympathy. This, she said slowly, shouldn't have gone on long enough for you to end up standing here. There was no blame in her tone. It sounded more like an admission that whatever was happening was bigger than I understood, and not entirely caused by me or by her. I felt the ground tilt a little. Not because she was some other woman in his life, but because of the way she stood there, calm, watching the truth land in front of me without needing to defend herself. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but only one came out, low and tired. What is he here? Juliet let out a soft breath, like she had to choose her words carefully. If you want to hear his story, she said, the only person who can tell you the truth is Colin. No answers, no arguments, but her eyes told me enough. I didn't understand the second life of the man who slept beside me. That evening, I waited for Colin in the living room. He opened the door and stopped the moment he saw me. His eyes moved across my face, then settled on the silence I left hanging in the room. I went to the studio, I said, straight out. Colin closed his eyes for a second, just one. But in that single second, I saw all the months he'd been hiding things from me. He sat down, fingers laced together like he was preparing to ask for forgiveness, but I didn't hear real remorse in his breath. Only the worry that the truth had finally surfaced. I'm sorry, he said. I just needed to do some things for myself. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with you. The words were light, almost weightless, and it was that weightlessness that hurt the most. Nothing to do with me, the person who shared a home with him, shared a life, every burden, every wound, every season of happiness. Nothing to do with me? Or was he keeping me away to protect a world where he felt more important? I looked at him, trying to keep my voice steady. You don't think I should know anything about the place where you spend more time than you spend on this marriage? Colin didn't answer, and his silence said everything. For the next several days, he was constantly busy in a way that was never specific, busy in a way that made me feel like someone standing in a hallway, hearing only echoes from a room he kept closed. One afternoon, while cleaning the garage, I found the tote bag he always kept in his trunk. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but today, for some reason, my hand opened it like it was acting on instinct. Inside was a notebook, small brown leather cover. I opened the first page. It wasn't work notes, not a to-do list. It was short entries, in Colin's familiar handwriting, but carrying a tone I'd never seen in him. Here I'm seen. When I led last night, they listened like I mattered. I want to become who they think I am. I don't feel trapped anymore. I flipped faster. Page after page was full of emotion, raw and honest, but not a single word about me. Not one line about where he saw me in this journey. Not a mention of our marriage. Not a mention of our life together. I kept rereading one line. I can be a better version of myself here. Here. Not at home. Not with me. A chill ran down my spine. I closed the notebook and put it back in the bag as if I'd never touched it. But inside me, something had already cracked in a way I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. That night, lying alone on the couch, I realized the thing that hurt the most wasn't the idea that he loved someone else. It wasn't Juliet. It wasn't anyone. It was this. Colin chose to give the best, strongest, most alive part of himself to somewhere else, not to this marriage. He poured his energy into the studio. He gave his presence to that group. He gave them a version of Colin that was alive and bright, a version I hadn't seen in years. And I was left with what remained, the tired part, the quiet part, the closed-off part. And in that moment, I understood something I'd been avoiding for a long time. This wasn't about him hiding something from me. This was about him having left this marriage a long time ago. Only his body was still here. That was the deepest betrayal I'd ever known. I sat in the car for a long time after reading the last pages of that notebook. Colin's words stayed in my head like a slow echo, repeating even after the notebook was closed. I knew I couldn't keep guessing. I needed the truth, not from Colin, who had stayed silent for a year, but from the one person who knew that other life inside and out. The next evening, I went back to the studio. Without looking for her, Juliet stepped out from a room in the back as if she already knew I'd come. She wore a thin gray sweater, her hair pulled up, her eyes neither defensive nor confrontational, just a quiet acceptance of someone who'd spent too long standing between two worlds. I stopped in front of her, my chest tight with all the questions pressing forward. But before I could speak, she gave a small nod, signaling, "Let's talk in here." The room she led me into was smaller, softly lit, warm, carrying the scent of new fabric and wood. Juliet sat down, set a bottle of water on the table, then looked at me directly. "Colin is an important part of this group," she began. "He's been coming regularly for almost a year." I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. "What does he do here?" Juliet laced her fingers together, like she was choosing words that wouldn't hurt me more than necessary. "We run coaching sessions, emotional expression work, personal sharing. A small, intimate group. Colin didn't just participate. He led some of the sessions. He's good, Nora. He shows up in a way I don't think you've ever seen in him." The sentence stung like a needle, not because Colin was good at something, but because she believed I'd never seen that part of him. "And he hid it from me," I said quietly. Juliet nodded. "Yes, intentionally. Not because he was doing anything wrong with me. This wasn't an affair. I want you to be clear on that. There was nothing secret between him and me, but there was another kind of intimacy, one that can cut deeper than a physical affair." I stared at the floor. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one I'd been feeling for a long time and never dared to name. "What kind of intimacy?" I asked. Juliet let out a soft breath. "He opened up here in ways he doesn't open up to anyone else, not because we're more special than you, but because he wanted to become a different version of himself. And this place gave him that." I stayed quiet. I didn't think my heart could drop any further, but it kept falling. Juliet watched me for a moment, then continued, slower this time. "I once asked him why he didn't bring you. Most of our members share this experience with the person they love." My throat tightened like someone had pressed a hand around it. "What did he say?" I asked. Juliet kept her eyes on mine. No avoiding, no softening. "He said she wouldn't understand, and I don't want to explain." The room seemed to shrink. I heard that sentence echo in my head again and again, like a crack running through a wall that had just been hit too hard. He didn't want to explain. He didn't think I would understand. He didn't want me to step into that part of his life. Not because I wasn't smart enough, not because I didn't care enough, but because he wanted to keep it for himself. A world he didn't want to share. I clasped my hands together, trying to stay steady. Juliet tilted her head, her voice soft, like she knew she was touching a wound, but still had to speak the truth. "You're not the reason he hid it. He hid it because this is the life he chose, and he didn't want it influenced by his marriage." I let out a small laugh, not because anything was funny, but because the weight of her words was too heavy for tears to rise. "You're not my rival," I said, realizing it the moment it left my mouth. "You're the person who saw him become someone else." Juliet nodded, her eyes softening just a bit. "I wish you were the one he shared it with first." I stood up. I knew if I stayed any longer, I would break right there in that room. When Colin came home that night, I was waiting for him in the kitchen. No lights, just the dim glow from the oven hitting the wall. He walked in and stopped when he saw me. "I talked to Juliet," I said. Colin closed his eyes, like someone had hit the exact place he was weakest. "You shouldn't—" "I should," I cut in, "because you didn't talk." His body tightened, but he didn't answer right away. His face looked unfocused, like he was searching for some kind of defense in a story where he knew he wasn't on the right side. I looked straight at him. "Do you love her?" Colin shook his head instantly. "No, not at all." But I couldn't breathe until he said more. And the words he added were the ones that cut the deepest. But I like who I am in that world, more than who I am with you. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But his words lifted me out of my own life like I was suddenly watching it from the outside. You like yourself there more, I repeated, slow and heavy. Colin stepped closer, his voice shaking because he knew he'd just admitted something he couldn't take back. Nora, I never meant to hurt you. It's just, there. I feel valued, heard. So here you're not, I asked. Colin didn't answer. His silence was the answer. I took a long breath. The sharp pain was gone. In its place was a wide, hollow space I barely recognized as mine. You didn't betray me by loving someone else, I said. You betrayed me by giving the best part of you to a world I was never allowed to enter. Colin lowered his head. I didn't want it to turn into this. But you let it, I said. He had nothing left to say. That night, after Colin was asleep, or pretending to be, which no longer mattered, I opened the closet and pulled out a large suitcase. I didn't cry while folding his clothes. I didn't shake as I placed each shirt inside. I didn't feel angry when I pulled the zipper shut. Everything was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat slow down, then settle into the rhythm of someone who had finally accepted the truth. I didn't pack his things because I didn't love him anymore. I packed them because love can't survive when only one person gets to be seen, while the other waits outside, hoping for their turn. When I set the suitcase by the front door, I knew one thing. Something in this marriage had ended. Not with a shatter, but with the clarity of someone who finally understood their worth, doesn't live in someone else's hands. The house was quiet, in a way it had never been on any night before. No footsteps from Colin, no keys hitting the table, no familiar warmth from the person who'd slept beside me for years. But what surprised me was that the silence didn't scare me anymore. It wasn't the emptiness of loss. It felt like the space you get right after taking off a shirt that's been squeezing you for too long. I walked around the living room and rested my hand on Colin's suitcase, still waiting for him to come pick it up. I thought I'd feel guilty or conflicted, but all I felt was lighter. Like I'd finally set down something I'd been gripping with a thin hope that had run out a long time ago. I realized I'd lived too long with someone who only gave me half the truth, and I kept trying to live fully on that half. One afternoon, Juliet texted and asked me to stop by the studio if I felt up to it. I went. Not to hear explanations, not to blame anyone, but to close a chapter in the calmest way I could. She met me in the lobby, her expression as gentle as the first time we met. No tension, no avoidance. I never wanted to be in the middle of the two of you, she said. But he has to face what he's done. I nodded. I know. And thank you for telling me the truth. That was enough for me. Juliet looked at me for a moment, then gave a small smile. Not the smile of someone who'd won, but of someone who understood that sometimes the truth only appears after everything has broken open. Colin came to the house 3 days later. He stood outside the door for a long time before I opened it. His eyes were red, his shirt wrinkled, the look of someone who'd lost his footing and didn't know how to hold on to what was left. Nora, will you let me talk? His voice shook in a way I'd never heard from him. I let him inside but stayed a few steps away. No closer. I want to come back, he said. I want to fix this. I don't deserve to lose you like this. I looked at him. The man in front of me wasn't the Colin from the notebook or the Colin from the studio. He was the Colin who'd gotten lost, pulled between two lives he'd built himself. You didn't betray me by loving someone else, I said slowly. You betrayed me by leaving me outside your life. Colin closed his eyes, like my words had cut exactly where he had no defenses left. He stepped closer, but I took a step back. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know how to have both. You didn't need to have both, I said. You just needed to be honest. But you chose a world where I didn't exist, and you lived in it for a year. Colin let out a hard breath, his hands tightening as if he could still hold on to something slipping away. But his eyes made it clear. He knew it was too late. I don't hate you, I said, but I can't keep loving someone who only gives me what's left over. He lowered his head and said nothing. It was the first time I saw Colin with nothing left to defend himself with. He left the house to the sound of the door closing, a sound I used to fear. But this time, it felt like a marker, the moment I stepped into a different life. In the days that followed, I learned how to arrange my life without wondering where Colin was, whether he was lying, or whether he was saving the best parts of himself for someone else. I made simple dinners, opened the windows to let the air in, let the house smell the way I wanted, without waiting for anyone's approval or resistance. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I just chose clarity, something I should have chosen long ago. I chose respect, starting with myself, and I chose a life where I didn't have to ask anyone for a place to stand. I still thought about that marriage, but not with the same sting. I thought about it the way people think about a road they once traveled, uneven, difficult, but one that brought me to where I needed to be now. One evening, when the sky darkened earlier than usual, I sat on the sofa and watched the light reflect off the window, and I said quietly, not to Colin, not to Juliet, but to myself, that phone call at 2 a.m. destroyed my marriage, but it gave me back my life. And for the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight. I took a long breath. It didn't shake. It was steady. I finally understood that the most important thing isn't keeping someone from leaving. It's keeping yourself whole. Some breakages show up to remind us that our worth doesn't live in anyone else's hands, and that walking away is sometimes the first step back to ourselves. If this story brings up your own journey, I want to ask you, have you ever left a relationship that no longer had room for you? What helped you find your footing again? If you want to stay with me through more stories about healing and growing, hit subscribe to support the channel. I'm grateful for every bit of support. Thank you for listening and staying until the end.